Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are talking about a condition that often flies under the radar, even though it can have a huge impact on digestion, nutrition status, energy levels, and overall quality of life. We are talking about exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, or EPI. And if you've struggled with bloating, diarrhea, urgency of your bowel movements, unexplained weight loss, nutrient deficiencies, or floating and greasy stools, there's a chance you've heard of pancreatic insufficiency. But what many people don't realize is that getting the diagnosis is often only part of the solution. One of the biggest misconceptions I see in practice is the belief that once someone starts pancreatic enzyme therapy, everything else should just fall into place. And while enzymes are incredibly important, they're only one piece of the puzzle. Diet plays a massive role in determining how well those enzymes work and how someone actually feels day to day. In this episode, we are breaking down what pancreatic insufficiency actually is, why it's so commonly mistaken for conditions like IBS and SIBO, and what a practical pancreatic insufficiency diet looks like in real life. We will talk about foods to prioritize, foods that tend to cause problems, how to structure meals, common nutritional deficiencies to watch for, and why eating as little fat as possible is not the goal. We'll also discuss something I see frequently in practice, which is people who are doing everything they're supposed to be doing, taking their enzymes consistently, following medical advice, and yet they're still struggling with symptoms. In many cases, that's a sign there may be other digestive issues happening alongside EPI that need to be addressed. So, whether you've been diagnosed with pancreatic insufficiency or suspect it might be contributing to your symptoms, or you're a practitioner looking to better understand the nutritional side of EPI management, this conversation will give you practical takeaways that you can start applying right away. So, let's dive in. So, first, let's define pancreatic insufficiency. What does that really mean? Well, the pancreas has two jobs. Most people know about the second one, which is producing insulin to regulate blood sugar. But the first job is the one that matters most for digestion, and that is producing enzymes that break down the food you eat. When you eat, your pancreas is supposed to release a mix of digestive enzymes, lipase to break down fat, protease to break down protein, and amylase to break down carbohydrates. With EPI, enzyme production is reduced enough that digestion becomes significantly impaired. Fat takes the biggest hit because lipase is the most affected, but protein and carbohydrate digestion can suffer too. Fat malabsorption is its own complex topic worth understanding in depth, and we're going to cover that fully in a separate episode. So the result of EPI is that food, especially fat, moves through your digestive tract without being properly broken down or absorbed. And instead of being used for energy and nutrition, it ends up passing through, which is why we'll see greasy or floating stools, urgency, and diarrhea. Over time, this means your body isn't absorbing the nutrients it needs, even when you're eating a full balanced diet. Fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K are particularly vulnerable because they require fat to be absorbed in the first place. And B12, iron, and magnesium are also commonly depleted with this condition. And EPI can develop for a number of reasons. Chronic pancreatitis is the most common cause, but it also can occur after a pancreatic surgery, with cystic fibrosis, in the setting of diabetes, and sometimes even just without any clear identifiable cause at all. One more thing worth noting, EPI doesn't always look like EPI. The symptoms of bloating, diarrhea, urgency, or weight loss overlap significantly with other conditions like IBS or SIBO or bile acid malabsorption. So it's not uncommon for people to spend years being treated for one of those conditions before EPI is ever considered. And in some cases, these conditions genuinely coexist. EPI and SIBO, for example, can layer on top of each other in ways that make both harder to manage. And we're going to come back to that. Daniela is a patient that came to me after nearly 4 years of searching for answers. It started with extreme bloating and gas that her doctors attributed to perimenopause. Then came an H. pylori diagnosis. It was treated, but her symptoms continued. She was also handed a low FODMAP diet. She was not given any explanation on how to apply the diet or how to follow the diet. She did the research on her own. She followed the diet carefully, and still she was having the symptoms. So by the time a doctor finally identified her pancreatic insufficiency, she was already exhausted. That kind of exhaustion that comes from years of feeling terrible and not getting anywhere. So she started the enzyme therapy and made some progress, but she just never got to 100%. The bloating, the urgency, the inflammation in her joints, the relentless fatigue, she was still having all of that. That's when she and I started working together. And what we figured out over time was that fat, not FODMAPs, was the real driver of her symptoms. The SIBO was real, the API was real, but no one had ever connected the dietary dots. And once we got her fat intake dialed in alongside her enzyme therapy, things started to shift in a way they never had before for her. Today, Danielle's inflammation is down about 95%. Her joints no longer hurt, her energy is back, the brain fog is gone, and she still watches her fat intake because that's just part of managing API long term. But she's no longer white knuckling her way through a combined low fat, low FODMAP diet at the same time. And lifting that low FODMAP layer made everything so much more manageable and so much more livable. And in her words, she said, treatment without proper nutrition doesn't go anywhere. If you identify the right treatment and supplement it with the right nutrition, that's the key to getting better and identifying the root cause. And Daniela actually shared her full story on the Gut Health Dialogues podcast. So definitely check out her story. It's in one of our previous episodes. We will actually link to it in the show notes for you. Especially if her experience resonated with you, it's worth a listen. Now, sometimes it's API, sometimes it's something else. So let's talk about why API is so often missed. A lot of people spend months or years being told they have IPS, or maybe they're treated for SIBO and they still don't feel 100%. If that's you, it is worth asking whether API has been properly ruled out. The symptoms of these conditions overlap significantly because the symptoms are bloating, urgency, diarrhea, and abdominal discomfort, which are just so common to so many GI conditions, which means EPI is frequently missed, misdiagnosed, or addressed only after someone has already been through the IBS and SIBO workup. It's not a rare scenario. It is something we see all the time. And if EPI has never been on your radar, it's worth bringing it up with your gastroenterologist or your functional medicine provider or your naturopathic doctor or a GI specialized registered dietitian like somebody in our practice. So those are the types of practitioners that can order this workup for you. EPI is typically diagnosed through a simple stool test called the fecal elastase test, and that measures the level of pancreatic enzymes present in your stool and can be ordered again by a gastroenterologist, a functional medicine practitioner, an integrative provider, either integrative and functional doctor or integrative and functional dietitian or nutritionist. So it's one of those tests that's easy to overlook if no one thinks to order it, which is a part of why API goes unidentified for so long in so many people. What makes it more complicated is that these conditions don't always exist independently of each other either. They can overlap. EPI and SIBO, for example, can occur at the same time, and the relationship between the two goes both ways. So, on the one hand, poor digestion and nutrient absorption from EPI can alter the gut environment in ways that feed the bacterial overgrowth, because when you have EPI, you're not breaking your food down fully, and food remains intact to feed bacteria further down the conveyor belt. On the flip side, SIBO can also make EPI symptoms harder to manage. So even if you have enzyme therapy on board, you can still have symptoms from the SIBO. So, in addition to SIBO making the EPI symptoms worse, SIBO can actually affect pancreatic output. So, the reason is the pancreas does not just release enzymes on its own, it relies on hormonal signaling to know when to do so. And there's a hormone called CCK, cholecystokinin, that's responsible for triggering that release. And when bacteria are overgrown in the small intestine, they can interfere with CCK signaling, which means the pancreas may not be releasing enzymes as effectively as it should, even when you're taking them. So we do see a cycle here in some cases that can be genuinely hard to break without addressing both conditions. And when both are present simultaneously, diet becomes extraordinarily complicated. Managing API alone already requires keeping fat intake pretty low and pretty structured. When you're managing SIBO alone, that already requires navigating a low FODMAP diet or a SIBO specific diet very carefully. Trying to do both at the same time, low fat and low FODMAP every meal every day, is one of the most difficult dietary situations we work with at Nutrition Resolution. And it leaves very little room for error and very little variety, and it can make eating just a full-time job. I had another client, we're going to call her Louise, and she lived this exact scenario. She came to me with both a confirmed EPI diagnosis and active SIBO. She was already on enzyme therapy, and we worked together on her diet. She made real progress initially, but she kept hitting a ceiling, symptoms that just wouldn't fully resolve no matter how carefully she managed her intake. And in her case, she kept noticing that if she ate out for lunch, she would have diarrhea after lunch. And that was frustrating because she didn't want to eat at home every single meal. And she enjoyed going out to lunch with her kids and with her family routinely throughout the week. And in her case, we were able to control her symptoms, but the dietary specification, if we're so precise as far as how much fat per meal, exactly which FODMAPs to avoid, exactly how to structure every eating occasion, that she wasn't able to control the symptoms unless she ate at home and made all of her own meals and just really stayed on top of it. And it was actually something she was not able to manage on her own. There were weeks while we were still figuring this out that she and I mapped out every single meal together, because without that level of hands-on support, she just wasn't able to figure out how to put it all together. And then once we fully addressed the SIBO alongside the API through a targeted dietary approach built around her specific situation, targeted antimicrobials, she finally got to what she hadn't experienced in years. She was at no bloating, no urgency, no pain after meals, and energy that actually lasted throughout the day. And that happened once her SIBO was resolved. So again, just like Daniela, Louise still watches her fat grams. That's just part of managing API, but she no longer has to follow a long-term diet on top of it. And this is something that we see consistently in practice. Once the underlying conditions driving symptoms are properly identified and addressed, the layers of dietary restriction that felt permanent often don't need to be permanent at all. So if you are managing EPI and let's say you're eating a low fat diet, you're taking your enzyme therapy and you're still not feeling well, it is worth having a conversation about what else might be going on. SIBO and IBS are two of the most common conditions we see layered on top of API in our practice. So you can talk to your provider about that, or feel free to contact us in our practice and we can help you sort it out. Our strategy call link is in the show notes. So next, let's talk about, does diet actually help pancreatic insufficiency? Well, by now, you know the answer. The short answer is yes, but not in the way most people think. Diet won't fix API. If you've been prescribed pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy or PERT, those enzymes are doing critical work that food choices alone can't replicate. But here's what a lot of people don't realize. Enzymes have a capacity limit. They can only do so much in a single sitting. And the typical way most people eat, eating out, grabbing convenience foods, or just eating without much thought, to fat content can easily push fat intake well beyond what even a well-dosed enzyme regimen can handle. So to put that in perspective, the average American diet runs somewhere between 70 to 100 grams of fat per day. For someone with EPI, the general recommendation is to keep total daily fat intake around 40 to 50. So it's almost half what most people are eating. And that fat intake should be spread across small, frequent meals. Now, a single restaurant meal can easily hit 40 to 60 grams of fat in one sitting. So, in other words, one meal out can consume an entire daily's fat budget. And there is no enzyme dose that can fully compensate for that, which is exactly why people can be on enzyme therapy and still feel terrible. So think of your digestive system like a washing machine. With EPI, you're already working with less detergent than you need. That's what enzyme insufficiency is. Now, imagine stuffing the machine beyond capacity on top of that. Not enough detergent, too much laundry, nothing comes out clean. And that's what happens when fat intake exceeds what your enzymes can handle. Keep the load manageable, and the detergent can do its job. Overload it and symptoms come right back, no matter how good the machine is. So, following that analogy, what we do with diet is we reduce how much we're putting in the machine. We reduce how much clothing we put in the machine since we're dealing with less detergent. And that means a lower fat diet. And that's why I'm saying that diet and enzymes work as a team. Enzymes make fat absorption possible. Diet keeps fat intake within a range that enzymes can actually manage. One without the other usually is not enough. And it's also worth saying this clearly. The goal of a pancreatic insufficiency diet is not to eat as little fat as possible. Eating too little fat creates its own serious problems, and that those are things like inadequate calorie intake, continued weight loss, and worsening deficiencies in fat-soluble vitamins that your body is already struggling to absorb. By the time you found EPI, you may have been not absorbing well for a long time. So you're already depleted in nutrients and over restricting your fat intake. Less is not better. And over restricting your fat intake is only going to worsen some of those deficiencies. So the goal is controlled, structured fat intake spread across small, frequent meals, not elimination. Now, we do have a meal guide. If you know me, you know I always have a meal guide for you. So we do have a downloadable meal plan. It's a pancreatic insufficiency diet in the form of a PDF. It gives you a complete list of foods to choose, foods to limit, a 7-day meal plan, and a grocery list for that 7-day meal plan. So it's designed to give you everything you need to hit the ground running and get started. So feel free to download that as your jump start, and that is linked to in the show notes. All right, so let's talk about the blood sugar connection and why glycemic balance also matters with EPI. One thing that often goes unaddressed in EPI management is blood sugar balance. The pancreas, as I mentioned initially, handles both digestion and insulin production, which means when one is affected, the other sometimes is too. And this is not something to fear, but it is something worth knowing about because it quietly influences how you feel day to day. So if you're having energy crashes after meals or difficulty maintaining weight and blood sugar that trends a little higher than expected, those are things that we can sometimes see alongside EPI. The good news is that a well-designed EPI diet can address both. So in addition to keeping fat controlled, you want to make sure to choose low glycemic carbohydrates and eat balanced meals across the day. And those things will not only support fat digestion, but they will also support blood sugar stability at the same time, and both matter for how you actually feel. So you're not doing extra work here. A well-structured EPI diet is already doing double duty. And yes, our download fits that criteria for low glycemic blood sugar control as well. Okay, so let's talk about the diet in more depth. So what can you actually eat with pancreatic insufficiency? So When fat digestion is compromised, the goal, as I mentioned, is not to avoid fat entirely, it's to distribute it strategically and choose foods low enough in fat that your body can actually process them. So, a good starting point is keeping fat around 40 to 50 grams per day total, spread across 3 smaller meals and 2 snacks rather than 3 large ones. When we're talking about proteins, the best choices would be lean proteins as your foundation here. So that would be skinless chicken breasts, ground turkey, white fish like cod, haddock, or tilapia, and shrimp all digest well without adding significant fat load. Canned tuna or salmon packed in water, or low fat Greek yogurt, or egg whites, or silken tofu can also round out the options nicely. Whole eggs are fine in moderation, but you would want to have one at a time rather than a 3 egg omelet. The yolk is what has the fat, so pairing one whole egg with additional egg whites is a good way to get the protein without overdoing the fat. When it comes to grains and starches, white rice, jasmine rice, oats, rice noodles, corn tortillas, and well-cooked potatoes or sweet potatoes are easy on the digestive system and tend to be well tolerated even when symptoms are active. And these foods are gentle, calorie dense without being fat heavy, and genuinely useful for someone trying to maintain or restore weight. And I listed those are kind of the lower fiber starches to start with if you're just starting your journey and you're super symptomatic. If you are a person who needs to be more concerned about glycemic control, you're absolutely fine choosing brown rice or quinoa and whole grains as your starches as well. Wheat products can be okay if you don't have celiac disease, but because of the overlap with SIBO that we've been discussing, they're probably best to avoid initially because they are high FODMAP in typical amounts that we eat. So what I would start with would be the gluten-free grains and starches. As far as vegetables, the cooking method matters a lot here. So steaming, roasting, or well cooking vegetables make them significantly easier to digest than raw ones, especially when your digestive system is already working with less enzymatic support than it needs. Good options here include carrots, zucchini, green beans, mushrooms, butternut squash, pumpkin puree, cooked spinach, and roasted bell peppers. Raw cruciferous vegetables like broccoli or cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, or raw cabbage tend to be harder to break down and are worth holding off on until symptoms are more stable. When it comes to fruits, ripe banana, peaches, pears, blueberries, melon, mango, unsweetened applesauce, and cooked or stewed fruit are solid choices because, again, the softer fruits are what we're going for. You can also choose canned fruit in juice, not in syrup, or frozen then thawed fruit that tend to work just as well as fresh and can make meal prep easier. I want to touch on papaya and pineapple because these often come up in conversations about digestive enzymes. Papaya does contain papain, the enzyme papain, and pineapple contains bromelain. And both of these have a reputation for supporting digestion. These, though, are not the same enzymes the pancreas produces. Pancreatic enzymes like lipase, amylase, and protease are what actually break down fat, carbohydrates, and protein. And I just want to say that no amount of papaya or pineapple is going to replicate that function. So both fruits are still great choices on this plan. Just don't expect them to replace actually taking the enzymes you need. Fats do not get eliminated, they just get managed. So small amounts of extra virgin olive oil or avocado oil, or even avocado, like about a quarter at a time, are your best fat sources that most people with EPI can incorporate without overwhelming their digestion. A teaspoon to a tablespoon of nut butter can work too, as long as it's a modest portion and not a frequent addition to meals that already contain fat. The key here is really distribution. It's balancing, it's budgeting. A piece of salmon, which is a higher fat fish, can still fit into your 10 grams per meal if it's served with maybe roasted vegetables. But you wouldn't want to have that same salmon drizzled with olive oil served with avocado and a handful of nuts on the side. So that's where you can easily exceed the fat gram limit, not only for the meal, but potentially your daily total. So we want to aim for roughly 10 grams of fat per meal as a starting point, potentially going up to 15. It really just depends how much fat you individually can handle and how much fat you may or may not have in your snacks. But 10 for your starting point is a good way to kind of calm things down initially, and then you can expand from there. Now, let's talk about foods to limit. So, because fat is the primary driver of symptoms with EPI, we're going to talk about foods that have more fat, but also raw and high fiber foods can also be harder to break down when the digestive system is already working with fewer enzymes than it needs. So, we want to pay attention to those too. And with any of this, the goal is not a permanent restricted diet. We want to initially reduce the digestive load while symptoms are active and enzyme therapy is being optimized, and then eventually build the diet out to include the most fat and fiber that we can tolerate. So, what are some of the specific foods to avoid? High fat proteins, so fatty cuts of beef and pork, like ribeye, bacon, sausage, spare ribs. Those are the most significant offenders in this category. Chicken skin, duck, fried or breaded proteins, full fat deli meats like salami or pepperoni, and organ meats like liver all fall into the same category. Canned fish packed in oil is another one, but that's an easy swap because you can just pick water packed instead and get your protein without all the fat. High fat dairy is another one to avoid. So whole milk, cream, full fat cheese, cream cheese, sour cream, and ice cream, these are all worth limiting. Full fat yogurt is also on that list, which surprises some people because they think of yogurt as healthy for digestion, but we really do have to choose lower fat yogurt, and Greek yogurt will give you more protein, so which is important. One of the tricky things is getting enough protein with EPI without getting all the fat. So Greek yogurt is a nice kind of trick there to getting lots of protein with very little fat. Like I said, the water packed tuna would be another one. We also need to avoid fried and processed foods. So this is a category where fat content tends to catch people off guard. Not the fried food so much, but certain processed foods. So thinking about granola, protein bars, and then even packaged baked goods, maybe like a packaged bran muffin. These might look healthy at first, but they can be surprisingly high in fat. Sometimes they can be up to 15 to 20 grams of fat per serving. And then obviously, more obviously, deep fried foods, fast food, chips and certain crackers with added oils and store-bought pastries are worth setting aside while you're managing your symptoms, or read labels really carefully on maybe certain crackers could work. You just have to check those fat grams. High fat sauces and condiments in general should be avoided or limited. So that would be cream based or butter based sauces, full fat dressings, pesto, unless it's in tiny amounts, and full fat canned coconut cream. These all can add significant fat to an otherwise manageable meal without really adding much volume. So it's easy to get in trouble with them. Tahini, hummus, and guacamole are similar. I know they seem like healthy options, but they can come with a lot of fat. So you may not need to take them off your table entirely. Just keep in mind they can be easy to overdo. So keep the amounts tiny. Raw and high fiber foods, your raw cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, raw cabbage, and large raw salads are harder to break down even for a fully functioning digestive system. Corn, beans, and lentils in large quantities, and high fiber cereals are worth moderating as well. Cooking vegetables well before eating them makes a really meaningful difference in how much digestive work is required. And this is especially true when fat malabsorption is still active because unabsorbed fat in the stool already contributes to loose, greasy bowel movements. And fiber adds bulk that speeds transit along even faster, pulling more unabsorbed fat through before the body has any chance to work with it. So fiber can compound the problem rather than helping it. I actually saw this play out with that client, Louise, I was talking about earlier. As we were working together, her doctor recommended adding a fiber supplement, but when she took it with meals, it consistently triggered diarrhea. So we moved it to between meals, away from any fat-containing foods, and that made a noticeable difference. So it's a good reminder that fiber timing matters more than most people realize when EPI is being managed, and something to keep in mind, which is why I'm kind of guiding you away from the raw roughage, from the high fiber foods, at least initially. Alcohol also warrants its own note because it's not just a fat issue. Alcohol directly irritates the pancreas and can worsen both EPI symptoms and progression. So, this one is worth avoiding or strictly limiting, not just moderating. And again, if you guys want a complete guide, you want all this in writing, the food list, the 7-day meal plan, and grocery list, check out that link to download it in the show notes. Now, let me give you some practical tips for how to eat with pancreatic insufficiency, because what you eat matters, but how you eat is just as important with EPI. A few structural changes to your meals can actually make a huge difference in how well your body tolerates foods, even before any dietary adjustments are made. So, this means eating smaller meals with snacks in between. 3 large meals puts a significant digestive demand on a system that's already working with limited enzyme output. So shifting to 3 smaller meals and 2 snacks throughout the day spreads that load out and gives digestion a more manageable job at each sitting. Timing your enzymes with every meal and snack. This is another one I see all the time, people asking, do I need to take my enzymes with snacks? And if you've been prescribed PERT, enzyme therapy, taking it consistently is really what makes the plan work. One of the biggest things we see when people have been prescribed enzymes and they're still having symptoms is the enzymes either being taken too late after a meal or skipped entirely. And sometimes it's because people aren't sure if they need to take them with every meal or not. Now, the real answer is only with meals containing fat, but honestly, most meals contain fat and even snacks. So just make it a rule, make it a habit to take them with every meal and snack. Your dosing will be lower typically at snacks, so ask your doctor how you should dose your enzymes for meals and for snacks. Everybody's dosing is a little different, so that's something your doctor will guide you on specifically. The other thing you can do is start with smaller portions, even if it means eating less than you think you should, because a lot of people with EPI have lost significant weight or are having trouble eating enough to keep weight on, or they're eating, but they're just not absorbing it. So weight can be a problem, and you might be given the advice or have been given the advice that you need to eat more, you need to gain weight, you need to boost your calories. But honestly, what we see is when your symptoms are flaring, trying to push large portions before your digestion is ready for it can backfire and can worsen symptoms and can actually set you back. It's honestly better to tolerate a smaller meal well than to trigger a reaction and set yourself back for a day or two. So feel free initially to start with smaller portions, even if that means eating less than you think you should while you're stabilizing on your enzyme therapy. And then, if weight restoration is a goal, be patient with the process. It's common to not hit your calorie targets right away, and that's okay. As your enzyme therapy is optimized and symptoms settle, your capacity tends to increase. Trying to force calories before digestion is ready will usually work against you. So take your time, ease into it, and give your body the time it needs to adjust to each step. The next thing, as we've mentioned, is cook your vegetables. Raw vegetables require significantly more digestive work than cooked ones. So steaming, roasting, or well cooking vegetables before eating them is one of the simplest adjustments that tends to have an outsized impact on symptom management. And then watch fat per meal, not just per day. I know I've mentioned this, but it's worth emphasizing again. As we covered in the food section, the distribution matters, keeping fat to roughly 10 grams or less per meal as a starting point, rather than saving it all for 1 or 2 sittings, tends to produce noticeably better results. Now let's talk about the nutrients to watch out for that are commonly depleted with EPI. So, because fat malabsorption is impaired with EPI, fat-soluble vitamins are the first to take a hit, and that is A, D, E, K. Your vitamins A, D, E, and K all require fat to be absorbed properly. So even if someone is eating a nutritious diet and taking their enzymes consistently, these nutrients can quietly become depleted. It's one of the more frustrating aspects of this condition. You're doing everything right on paper, but you still end up deficient. B12, iron, and magnesium are also commonly affected. B12 is an interesting one because its absorption relies on a handoff process that pancreatic enzymes play a direct role in. So, low enzyme output can quietly deplete B12 even when everything else looks fine. Iron and magnesium can be impacted as well when overall absorption is compromised. And these deficiencies don't always show up as obvious symptoms right away. In fact, once we see symptoms, typically these deficiencies are well underway. And that's part of what makes them easy to miss early on. And that's why labs matter. A standard annual panel does not always capture what's relevant for someone with EPI. Targeted testing for fat soluble vitamins, B12, and iron can give you a much clearer picture of what's actually going on nutritionally. And magnesium is worth monitoring too, although standard serum magnesium tends to stay normal until depletion is super severe. So red blood cell or RBC magnesium is a more sensitive marker and worth requesting specifically. Supplementation can help, but it's worth doing strategically rather than just picking something off the shelf and staying on it indefinitely. So, what I mean is, don't just add these vitamins in because you heard me say this and just stay on them long term, especially iron for one, and also fat soluble vitamins in particular need to be dosed and monitored because for any of these, too little may not move the needle, but vitamins A, D, E, and K, especially when supplemented, can accumulate to problematic levels at high doses over time. Those and iron are nutrients that we can get toxic levels of if we supplement longer than it's needed. So, what I'm recommending is if you start supplementing these nutrients, make sure it's based on deficiencies showing up on labs, and then plan to retest around 3 months to see whether it's working and whether the dose needs adjusting. That retest is the step most people skip, and that's the one that actually tells you if what you're doing is working and gives you a sense of how much further you have to go. And then you would stop the supplementation once you've repleted to normal levels, so long as your diet and enzyme therapy are on track and your condition has stabilized, which would signal that you're absorbing more normally. Now I'm going to walk you through just an example day of what to eat with EPI. So this is what a well-structured day of eating with EPI can actually look like in real life. Okay, so for breakfast, you might have oatmeal with banana and a little dab of almond butter. Oats are gentle, they're easy to digest, they're low glycemic, and they help provide steady energy without a heavy fat load. A ripe banana adds a natural sweetness, so you don't need sugar or brown sugar, and it digests easily. And then a small spoonful of almond butter stirred in brings a little protein and fat. And a small amount stays well within a manageable range for most people with EPI, because remember, our goal is less than 10 grams per meal. So this meal fits the bill and will give you sustained energy and nutrients. For your morning snack, you want to have something like a low-fat Greek yogurt with blueberries or any other soft fruit for that matter. And this is a nice, simple protein forward snack that keeps fat low and is really easy and quick to prepare. Greek yogurt also provides some calcium, which is worth paying attention to when full fat dairy, like full fat cheeses and other full fat dairy products, are having to be modified. Lunch can be a ground turkey rice bowl with steamed zucchini and carrots, or maybe drizzled with coconut aminos, or even a little soy sauce, or even some salsa, depending on what flavor profile you're going for. And that gives you the lean protein, the well-cooked vegetables, and it's a flavorful, low-fat kind of seasoning that doesn't add a lot of digestive burden. And this bowl is really easy to batch cook and reheat. So you can make maybe 3 lunches at a time for the week and maybe batch prep something like this twice a week. So that really helps, especially when your energy is limited. For an afternoon snack, you could have unsweetened applesauce with a rice cake, and that's a nice light, low fat, easy to digest option for an afternoon snack. And then dinner could be baked cod with roasted butternut squash and white or brown rice. And white fish is one of the best protein sources for EPI because it's so low in fat, it's easy to digest, and it's really versatile. And then butternut squash adds nutrient and pairs well with simple seasonings like ginger or olive oil. Now, our full 7-day plans includes more complete meals, full recipes, nutrition information, and the grocery list for the week. You can download that from the show notes. Now, let's talk about when diet is not enough. Diet and enzyme therapy are the foundation, but they are not always the full picture. One of the patterns we see consistently in practice is someone who is doing everything right. They're taking their enzymes with every meal, they're following a low fat diet, they're working with their doctor, and they're still struggling with symptoms. So that could be things like persistent bloating, loose stools that won't fully resolve, ongoing fatigue, or nutrient deficiencies that aren't correcting despite supplementation. These are all signs that something else may be going on. And honestly, API rarely exists in a vacuum. The same conditions and processes that damage the pancreas or impair enzyme output often affect the broader digestive environment as well. SIBO, gut microbiome imbalances, compromised gut barrier function, and impaired digestive motility are all common findings in people with EPI who aren't responding the way they should to standard dietary and enzyme support. When the microbiome is disrupted or the gut environment is inflamed, even well-dosed enzyme therapy has a harder time doing its job. And this is where a root caused approach changes the outcome. Rather than adjusting the diet further or assuming more enzymes are the answer, we look at what's actually happening in the gut through microbiome testing, breath testing, and a comprehensive picture of digestive function. And from there, we build a targeted plan that addresses the underlying contributors, not just the symptoms on the surface. So if you've been managing EPI and feel like you've hit a ceiling with diet alone, that's often the sign that a deeper look is warranted. And you can learn more about how we work through our Nutrition Resolution Signature Healthy Gut Restoration Program. We'll link to that in the show notes. That page illustrates what the different phases are of our program. Or you can just schedule a 15-minute strategy call and we can talk through what's going on with you and whether we would be a good fit to help. All right, guys, that's your gut check for today. Come back in a week for your next gut check.